All right, everyone, welcome to an informal workshop discussion titled Bent Matter, Roots of Digital Justice and Injustice. My name is Jessa Agilo. I'm the founder of ArtsPond. This workshop is being hosted by ArtsPond, but it's actually funded both in part through an individual grant to myself through Canada Council of Professional Development to look at digital transformation topics, but it's also related to some of the work that ArtsPond is doing. So it's duly funded by Canada Council for the Arts, both to me as an individual and to ArtsPond through our Together There digital justice project, as well as the Government of Canada and Ontario Arts Council and the Government of Ontario. And I'm putting in lots of in-kind time through my sole proprietorship at Agilo Arts. So hi, hello, Anine, Atalahai, bonjour. Welcome. ArtsPond and myself are currently joining you from Tikaranto, or Treaty 13, a part of the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Mississaugas of the Credit. I think with those in attendance, would you like to have screen descriptions? I wasn't going to do that, but I'm happy to if either of you need screen descriptions. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I will not be adding visual descriptions of what we're seeing on screen. So the agenda briefly today has 4 parts. Just briefly talk about what is digital justice and conversely injustice, and why is digital justice and fights against injustice important? How can we in the arts and culture sector support either through allyship and solidarity with other social movements, or within the arts sector, how can we lead conversations and actions that support digital justice, both in arts and culture, but also in other communities? And then depending on your interest, we can have a kind of a collaborative, co-creative discussion about what digital justice actually looks like to you based on what I'm sharing with you today. So let's start with that first question. What the heck is digital justice anyway? I think we can just start by saying it's an emergent topic that defies simple definition. I think it's pretty relatable and easy to see that. There are projects, which we'll talk about a little bit later, other than ArtsPond in arts and culture that are doing work around digital justice. So it's not a new topic, but trying to understand the dependencies and the blames and the opportunities about digital justice and digital injustice in arts and culture is very new. And so trying to define what this means and what it looks like and the rationales that we need to make and the impacts and the stories that we need to tell about all the harms and all of our hopes for the future are very emergent. And AI, the emergence of generative AI and other forms of AI are really making it extra urgent to figure some of this stuff out. Broadly, I would define digital justice as a social movement that seeks to inspire diverse individuals and communities to work together to cultivate alternative digital futures that are more sustainable, respectful, inclusive, equitable, accessible, whatever positive word, more caring that you would like to insert there that's related to the communities that you're working with. And conversely, digital justice is also a movement to understand all the opposites, all the things that are contributing to the lack of all of that, the lack of respect, the lack of sustainable, inclusive, equitable, accessible cultures. Digital justice, in order to fight for that, we also need to realize what the barriers and the gaps are. So it's a conversation, a dialogue between both. Locally and globally, I would say calls for digital justice seek to amplify solutions that protect all of us, but especially marginalized communities and communities that have experienced a lot of oppression, both in real life as well as in virtual and digital life, to seek protections against technologies of oppression and harm and all the ripple effects that come from those, both in, as I mentioned, in real life and virtual life, but other realms of life, such as our dream life or thinking about ancestral care or in the natural world. There's lots of realms of life that digital is increasingly both an opportunity to provide care and also a element of oppression and threat for many different people, for communities, for ecosystems, and for the planet. So it's both positive and negative here. And this is where digital justice plays in for me, is the dialogue between the positive and negative, better understanding of both, but also trying to realize how digital technologies, digital infrastructure, digital culture, and community can be in close allyship with other social movements, such as environmental justice, disability justice, economic justice, social justice, to move those movements forward. There's a double use of the same word, but you get what I mean. To see positive progression, both as a tool in order to bring people together, to make things more efficient, to increase access, because people who are stuck at home and aren't able to go to live events, but also are geographically remote or just not in the community that you are located, digital offers all kinds of opportunities to expand access and care, but also responsibility and accountability and kind of forums for failure, shall we say. So there's lots there to think about and all those ripple effects, positive and otherwise. At the same time, I would say digital justice also seeks to elevate the positive contributions of carrying digital technologies. I've kind of been talking, I leaped ahead and talked about that a little bit. Digital technologies and infrastructure that have helped strengthen the connection and prosperity of marginalized communities who have otherwise been excluded. So I've kind of been talking about that for the last couple of minutes. There's a nice summary point for you. I'm also going to add that this PowerPoint will be available to you to download from our website. So I can put that in chat at any time if you'd like to download it now. I'd be happy to share. So what more on what is digital justice? The first organization, community, social movement that I could find on the web that talked about digital justice with relationship to culture was within the media industry. And it's the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition. There are many similar co-creative, community-led, volunteer-led, and also not-for-profit organizations that have since been founded. And we're going to talk about some of those a little bit later. But the first one that I was able to find was the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition. And they have a number of principles that are available on their website. They've not been very active in the last few years. I think they started in, if I remember, 2017, but don't quote me on that. Could be a year before, a year after, but thereabouts. So 5 to 6 years or thereabouts of work, but not a lot of activity in the last couple of years. But I still find the principles are very, very relevant. And so from a media perspective, they talk about access and digital justice being a realm where members of our community are ensured equal access to media and technology, both as producers and as consumers. And I'm just going to quickly run through them, but you can go and read all about them in more detail on their website. Digital justice in terms of access provides multiple layers of communications infrastructure to ensure that every member of the community has access to life-saving emergency information, is how they phrased it. From my point of view, it would also just be in order to contribute to community. It's not just about saving their lives, it's about them saving our lives. Access is a two-way street. It's not just about care for them. It's what disabled people can do and other people that need access can do with us. Digital justice values all different languages, dialects, and forms of communication is also how they position access. Participation from the DDJC's point of view prioritizes participation of people who have been traditionally excluded from and attacked by media and technology, trying to advance abilities to tell stories, tell our own stories with buy-in for these communities, but also our own stories as intermediaries and caregivers and media conveners. Digital justice values non-digital forms of communication in terms of participation and fosters knowledge sharing across generations. It's also important to them. Finally, they talk about digital justice demystifying technology to the point where we can not only use it, but create our own technologies, our own communities of power and dialogue that are rooted in a digital community, but perhaps are actually engaging people in real life or related to the natural environment and so on. They don't talk about the complexities of those realms of life, but I would. They talk about creating their own technologies and participating in decisions that will shape the development of communications infrastructure in media, is how they position participation. Common ownership, they talk about fueling creation of knowledge, tools, and technologies that are free and shared openly with the public, and that they're collectively owned and governed, that the community, the public, has power, or at least at minimum a say in what happens with that technology or infrastructure, what it looks like, how much it costs, what its mission and mandate is, when there are problems, who's responsible with dealing with the problems, and so on. They also talk about, in terms of common ownership, promoting diverse business models, where control and distribution of information and access to governance and decision-making is diverse and open to multiple tiers of community and so on, with municipal ownership taking first priority. Healthy Communities talks about spaces where people can investigate community problems and generate solutions and create media and organize together. Such as alternative energy solutions or recycling and salvaging technology, cleanup of digital waste and e-waste, advancing community-based economic development by expanding access to small businesses or access to technology with small businesses and entrepreneurs and independent creators and so on. Okay, I think that's probably enough about that. That gives us a basic grounding, and I'd like to now kind of try to launch us deeper into that, but also beyond that within the realm of arts and culture. So thanks to Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund and ArtsPond's Digital ASO OSN Numérique project, we did a bunch of roundtables and circles across Canada, both as general community conversations, but also targeted, caring-centered conversations with BIPOC, Black and Indigenous and people of color conversations where the wider community was not invited. And on screen is a graphic recording. This has been shared multiple times throughout our media, so you might have seen it before, but just highlight some of the key learnings that came with this workshop that was facilitated by the lovely Nazma Ahmed from the Digital Justice Lab here in Toronto, digitaljusticelab.ca. And so they talked about the principles of digital justice that we just talked about: access, participation, common ownership, and healthy communities. And then we did a creative exploration of, okay, these principles, how do these resonate, and what else is there in arts and culture? So what we identified were primarily inequities and not necessarily what to do about them. So a lot of digital sourced or digitally rooted precarity and injustice. So we identified inequities that were access related, both physical and navigational, the lack of privacy and the overwhelming digital surveillance in both personal and public space, and the exploitive extractive practices of big tech that hire a lot of gig workers and take advantage of them with low paid labor and insecurity and all these negative things that are happening that help these big tech platforms realize unprecedented profits on the backs of marginalized and oppressed people. Participants also discussed potential paths in a brief way and in a general way to a just digital future, which included commitments to collective imagination and solidarity as a means to realize policy changes that recognize digital access as a human right. So we've had discussions about human rights, expansion of human rights in the last several years, affordable housing as a human right, clean water as a human right, Indigenous reconciliation and reparation and land back as a human right, and digital access is one that I would like to add. In our community, the BIPOC folks saw as important to add to these social movement conversations is digital access is also a human right and something to fight for. There's a lot more in this diagram that we could talk about, but I'm just going to move on. After this workshop and taking in about 100 pages of notes from all these roundtables and circles and commission thought pieces over 2.5 years, we tried to condense it all into a knowledge framework. And this has also been shared for about 2.5 years or a year and a half. And that's what you're seeing on screen is a distillation of what we heard with 3 themes, a kind of a problem framing and reframing theme, which was fostering bridges and cultivating trust, a solution building or being frame that was about building up wise practices in order to address needs around human desirability and access feasibility in digital technology and infrastructure and community. And then finally around viability of ecologies that are built on digital infrastructure and technology, advancing a just digital society and trying to validate and invalidate what sharing our content and our ideas and building community and being in shared communities and digital spaces and what a viable ecosystem looks like there. And that's where we have 5 things in green that for us relate to digital justice. And it was this conversation that really highlighted the opportunity to do a digital justice project. We were already going to do it before we launched this project, but it really gave us some confirmation and validation that there was interest and need. So digital rights, we just talked about digital rights as human rights, and not as, they are human rights. Etiquette is inspired by racialized and indigenous communities where we talk about protocols of care and cooperation and respect and reciprocity and honoring of tradition and legacy and ancestors. A lot of etiquette there when you're trying to work and be in allyship with those communities. So etiquette is what are the protocols and how do we be in close allyship and cooperation with communities that need respect and deserve care in a way that is different from traditional ways of doing so. Language is about honoring and supporting particularly Indigenous and Francophone and plain language ways of thinking and sharing and being and doing. Because our digital languages are very much based on fluent English and not much else. So trying to think about how do we communicate and build communities that support ASL and LSQ and plain language and Spanish and other languages that are not fluent English. Autonomy is about digital economies empowering rather than exploiting the integrity of an individual lives and experiences. So helping digital economies and systems and infrastructure that actually help individuals build their own self-sufficiency rather than being exploited upon. And access, we've kind of talked a lot about already. Access, digital technologies are accessible for everyone, including people with disabilities and all kinds of disabilities, and deaf people and racialized and marginalized and oppressed people, low income, women, youth, and so on. Okay, so that then led us to the Digital Justice Project, which we also are very grateful to have received funding from Canada Council for the Arts, Digital Strategy Fund. We're mid-phase on that project. It's been on pause for about 10 months or 12 months as we have strived to learn from what we experienced in the first phase, and not necessarily to reposition the project, but just imagine a more caring way to go forward, while also taking into account all the learnings that we've been garnering through our other projects. And working in such close harmony, ideally, with Indigenous, deaf, disabled, racialized, and outside the core, which are the 4 priority groups for this project, is something that's very uncommon. And there's just so many learnings, so we've decided it's important to go slow. So slowness is the modus operandi. We're going to only be together there at some point in the future if we take our time. So we took a year to really just, okay, what is digital justice? What is it that we're fighting for? And who do we want to be working with in allyship outside the arts and inside the arts to move forward? And so to help frame conversations about digital justice, this is something that I designed, is a 5-tiered framework inspired by the concept of beehives and bees, and how they're going out and exploring the world, seeking the juicy sustenance of all our knowledge and wisdom and community and power and so on in flowers, but for us it'd be people and communities and ecosystems. And I like the intersectionality of it, of a beehive itself, where things can be together and not together at the same time. And if you have layers vertically as well as horizontally, then you can get into quite a bit of complexity. So the 5 themes that I came up with were harming, hindering, hacking, helping, and harmonizing. And I'm saying that I came up with them. I certainly led the design of this, but I do want to acknowledge all the team members from the Together There project, our curators and producers, I'm forgetting, blanking on their title. Well, knowledge leads and sort of associate producers. That wasn't their title, but they're helping distill through some of this. And absolutely, I couldn't have come up with this without their support, for sure. So go to togetherthere.ca if you want to see who were helping. But I led this. The idea is that there are a lot of harms around digital justice that are systemic and difficult and complex to talk about, and like, oh, disaster. And there's also harms that are maybe a little less urgent. They are annoying, they hinder us, but collectively, when we bring them together, the 10 things that annoy us about digital, collectively, they may be as big, if not bigger, than something that we identify as harmful. So there's that idea of things that harm us, things that hinder or annoy us are important to think about in our digital worlds. And then shifting from negative towards positive and neutral, shall I say, is hacking. So we can both hack systems that are hindering us or harming us, but we can also be hacked. The work that we are doing in community, we can be hacked. And I see generative AI as a tool that's hacking us at the moment. and we haven't quite figured out how it is hindering us and how it is harming us. So I see a lot of harms, I see a lot of hindrances, but I think the community is still trying to figure it out overall. So I would place it in a hacking zone. It's more neutral, can't figure out what's positive and what's negative. But I prioritize our perspective that we are hacking back the things that hinder and harm us, to try to subvert them, position them differently, pivot them, take control of them in some way. And then not neutral or messy middle, shall we say, moving more towards positives, helping and harmonizing. So helping to address harms or things that hinder us, and then harmonizing not just our own work, but multiple people. This is where allyship and solidarity comes into the fray here. So a couple examples for each of these. So algorithms of oppression, stories of erasure might be an example of harming. Eating up time, the lost lives of social media might be a workshop that we could do around things that hinder us in digital. Signs of inclusion, deaf internet culture could be about hacking to make ASL communities more readily accessible to everyone. Educating youth, Indigenous game designers could be a way about helping, or an international day of action led by artists around digital justice could be a way to harmonize. Okay. I'm working on a book called Bent Matter, hence the title of today's presentation. And it's ultimately not just about digital justice and injustice. It's about precarity, justice, and injustice intersectionally. And the knowledge and the experience and my dreams as a white person, as a disabled person, as a queer and transgender person, to be an allyship. What allyship and solidarity, and the next step beyond that. What does that look like as a white person who has founded an organization that's trying to work in these spaces of, diversity, equity, inclusion, and we also add belonging and access to that. So BIDEA, BIDEA, not just DEI. How can we be in allyship while letting go of any power and privilege that we have as a white founded organization, but also taking advantage of that privilege in a way that is beneficial to all the groups that we are in allyship with? So I'm trying to, first of all, figure out language. Remember from the digital justice, we talked about language. So what are all the words? What are all the root causes? So you just saw a framework of 5 that were H words. I have another framework, I have many frameworks of 5 that will be in the book. The other one I this is called, which I forget what I call this. I call the Hive, actually. I have another framework that I call the renewal framework, and it's 5 R's. And it is the root causes, the ripple effects, the reactions or responses, the remedies or therapies, and the resources that are necessary to understand and lift up in order to move social justice and care forward from an intersectional point of view. But on the screen, there's a bunch of concepts related to digital precarity and injustice, the root causes, getting into the ripple effects and the responses and the remedies and the resources are what the book is ideally about. But today I just want to introduce these to you. I love with the work that we're doing at ArtsPond, trying to keep things, knowledge and concepts that we can hold in one hand. So no more than 5. So surveillance capitalism, digital exploitation, platform domination, digital divide, and digital discrimination are 5 concepts with some support of actually ChatGPT. I will openly acknowledge, have identified these concepts. And I will put in chat a link to a Word document or PDF that you can download where you can read a short description of each of these. It's about 8 pages. So I'm not going to go into detail right now about all of these, but these are some of the concepts that have come up so far. And it is not by any means complete. But for example, digital divide, infrastructure deserts would be the lack of affordable and relevant high-speed internet for people in Nunavut and the Yukon. They're reliant on often satellite internet, and if it's expensive and if it's cloudy, they can't get any access. So digital divide, we've talked a lot about human rights and the lack of it for digital discrimination. Redlining, you hear about housing and political maneuvering around election districts and so on, but there's also cyber redlining in terms of access to communities. So it's a whole book on surveillance capitalism. When Google wanted to bring their housing development project to the lakeshore, there was a big uproar about it because it was all about platform capitalism. They were going to have all kinds of digital monitoring systems on the sidewalks and every building. Everything about that place was going to be digitally monitored. So all kinds of concern about profiling and monetization of personal data. Lots of stuff happening around colonialism, obsolescence, planned obsolescence of digital hardware is digital exploitation. Platform domination is really about the big five. I won't name them here because I hate amplifying them, but you know who they are. The big five really taking over all economic opportunity, but also defining what community looks like in terms of digital platforms. So there's all kinds of stuff happening around that that's negative. So just trying to expand the lens out beyond digital, there are 6 other areas that I've been exploring for the purposes of this little book that I'm working on. Digital is one of them. Accessibility, spatial, fiscal or economic, social and environmental, precarity, and injustice and justice are other areas. And I've come up with 5 areas to kind of focus on for each of them. So if you want to learn more about this, I'm happy to have another conversation about this, but this is very much a work in progress. But these are kind of the root causes. So social, like ageism and racism and sexism, that would not surprise you. In terms of accessibility, ableism and obstruction and exclusion and homogeneity and isolation might be words that would be meaningful to you. In terms of spatial world, so housing and real estate, but also real communities on the ground. Population change, gentrification, financialization of real estate would be issues. Deregulation is a big one, and so on. So here I'm showing this because for me, I'm still trying to figure it all out, and all the projects that we're doing is to try to figure it out. There is a lot of intersectionality going on, digital and injustice and precarity. I've highlighted 5 there, but I cannot easily separate them from all these other issues. And so trying to understand the interdependencies between them, but also how subverting or hacking one area might positively impact the others, while negatively impact one in ways that we hadn't anticipated. Trying to understand that means we need to have a kind of an understanding of all these different intersectionalities. So the idea is that eventually we'll have a much wider map, and there's only the 3 of them, not all 5, but eventually there would be all 5 of the roots, the ripples, and remedies, both in terms of all of these areas of precarity and how they'll root out from ArtsPond's perspective to work that we're doing to try to elevate prosperity. And we now do 5 things. So there's one more to add to this diagram, but building creativity, building knowledge, building ecosystems, platforms, and amplifying stories is the 5th one. For me, eventually this will be what we're working towards, looking at planet-wide roots and systems, ripples in communities, remedies that are led by individuals, and so forth. So having all these different layers. So we're at 45 minutes. So I'm gonna skip this diagram. This is actually part of our upcoming strategic plan. some of the pre-work. I don't actually think we're using this diagram very much in the strat plan itself. It's there in pieces, but it's just the idea of trying to come up with the words and the issues in using plain words and plain language that look at the root causes of precarity and the steps and remedies that we need to do in order to get to prosperity. So I'm going to skip this over. If you want to learn more about this, come to a workshop on the 25th or the 26th of this month, where I talk about our strat plan, which is called Wellsprings. So this is our Wellsprings framework, one of them anyway. Just want to spend, I guess, won't have as much time for conversation, but I'll spend 5 minutes talking about what can we do to support digital justice in arts and culture. So one area is that the DJJC, the Digital Justice Coalition from Detroit, talked about. So the DDJC, not DJJC, talked about was collective ownership. And one tack to collective ownership is platform cooperatives. And we're actually, thanks to Canada Council for the Arts and Digital Strategy Fund, we have been trying to establish a platform cooperative called Arts United that's with, by, and for all those equity-serving groups, but focused on gig workers and small enterprises. In arts and culture, there are 3 cooperatives that are established or want to become established as cooperatives. Stocksy United was the first one that I became aware of in Canada for stock photography. They're quite large, but the original founders have sold the platform, and it seems to have shifted a little bit in terms of with the new owners. Resonate is a streaming platform for music, resonate.coop, and fineline.art is led by OCAD University. They were also interested in establishing a platform cooperative to support graduates of OCAD University in the sale of their artwork and trying to help them transition their careers from being a learner to being a working artist. And so they have since launched this platform. It's not yet a cooperative, but they intend to, so it's something to watch. Fineline is the name of that. Research creation is a big area. So there are a couple universities around the world. I would mention 2 based in Canada, one that's less active now and one that has been active for the last few years, I think is maybe in the wind down phase now. The Digital Justice Research Cluster is based out of Eastern Canada, and the Digital Justice Lab is based here in Toronto at York University. Doing research creation. So working with students and professors to imagine research creation approaches to digital justice topics. The University of Toronto, the York University project at digitaljusticelab.com is really profound. There's lots of work that they've been doing. Lots and lots. It was funded by Shirk, amongst others. There's also the Digital Justice Lab, the same name, but not .com.ca, which is Nazma Ahmed's organization. She's the founder. There's N10 in the United States. It's not an arts organization, but they do a lot of stuff around digital justice in not-for-profit spaces. The Canadian Centre for Not-for-Profit Digital Resilience is also in the not-for-profit space, not in the art space, but it's currently being stewarded by not Imagine Canada, I think. They changed over. I think it's Imagine Canada that's stewarding them now. But just looking at the concept of digital and resilience, and media justice is very similar to the kind of, they talk about things are very similar to the Digital Justice Coalition from Detroit, because it's a media organization, but lots of stuff happening there around justice in digital spaces. Virtual Grounds was a creative thought residency, creation residency around digital justice topics here in Toronto by Trinity Square Video. So they have a website around that and some creative projects. It was a 2-year project. The plugin ICA in Winnipeg did a magic keystrokes and glitter residency with curators from Canada and overseas about digital justice topics and how do we curate artists, trying to understand an approach for creating a framework for recruiting and sharing digital justice related artwork. And there's Together There also. And at Together There, you could go to our call for submissions for ideas about how we might create artwork as artists and creators under the art making call for participants, focusing on the creation of original artworks or models or sketches or excerpts, collections, memes, mind maps, and other creative formats around digital justice topics. So, for example, you could write a poem for youth about the importance of digital rights as human rights, or explore with disabled artists of color who are making work about digital justice and propose a curatorial framework, as we just mentioned, to produce and present and support their work in the future. So that'd be around art making. Sense making is the language I use around producers and managers and governors and curators and educators, not necessarily artists and makers. Folks that are thinking about systems and ecologies. Artists do that too, but sense making about how do we support artists. So focusing on the creation of knowledge and community development, reports and strategies, recommendations, etc., about digital justice and how we could go forward with that. So review government strategies and plans on digital transformation and suggest changes to better reflect needs of diverse communities, or develop a discussion guide to help arts and culture organizations find their way through this and how they might want to create new programs to support this. Review recent initiatives on Indigenous data sovereignty. Pardon me, I've just blanked on the author, but CBC just 2 or 3 weeks ago interviewed an Indigenous author who did a whole book about Indigenous sovereignty in data and digital spaces. So Canadian authors, but I'm blanking on the author's name, pardon me. But there's a lot of work happening in these kinds of spaces, and I think of these as sense making. And then there's more hybrid approaches that are a mixture of the two. So creator producers and advocates and activists and people who are in the arts and not in the arts could potentially work in this area. So develop a strategy for a national day of action, as I mentioned. Develop a piece of writing with hyperlinks for citations to honor and show the way disabled or Indigenous thinkers are building on each other's work in the digital world. So there we go. I went 12 minutes over. We have 8 minutes left for some discussion. Apologies. We also started 10 minutes late, so we're actually relatively on time. But yeah, what do you think? That's the end of today's presentation. For the purposes of the video, I'm going to just stop recording now. And thank you for watching. Check us out at artspond.com for more information.